Something happened on a hockey podcast this week that Edmonton fans are going to want to hear about, because a former NHL defenseman just came right out and said what a lot of people have been thinking but were maybe afraid to say out loud. On the Oilers Nation Everyday podcast, Jason Dames didn't hedge, didn't qualify, didn't do the usual analyst dance around a bold claim. He looked at the Pacific Division heading into 2026 to 27 and basically said there's no real competition left for Edmonton. Stick around, because by the end of this you're going to understand exactly why he feels that way and whether the numbers actually back him up. Let's start with the team everyone assumed would be Edmonton's biggest roadblock, the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas finished ahead of the Oilers last season, edging them out for the top spot in the division by a mere 2 points. That's razor thin. That's the kind of gap that makes you think the rivalry is only going to get tighter. But Dames doesn't see it that way anymore. He pointed out that Vegas is now a year older across the roster, which matters more in a league that's trending younger and faster every season. More importantly, he brought up the loss of their leading goal scorer, a guy who put up over 30 goals last year and never got properly replaced. When you lose that kind of finishing power and don't bring in a like-for-like answer, it shows up on the scoreboard eventually, no matter how deep your roster looks on paper. Then there's the goaltending question, and this is where Dames got even more specific. Carter Hart had flashes of brilliance in the playoffs last season, no doubt about that, but the biggest story was his health. He battled injuries for a significant chunk of the year, and when the games mattered most, in the final, he wasn't the version of himself that got Vegas there in the first place. For a team built around structure and elite goaltending, that's not a small crack, that's a foundation issue. And Dames made it clear that until Vegas proves that's fixed, he's not buying them as the top dog in the Pacific anymore. So if Vegas has question mark and the rest of the division isn't exactly stacked either, who does that leave standing at the top? Dames didn't dance around it. He said he looked at the entire division, ran through every team, and simply couldn't find one that he believed could realistically knock off Edmonton this season. That's a massive statement to make in a league where parity usually keeps things unpredictable, but he stood by it. Now let's talk about why Edmonton actually earned that kind of confidence, because this wasn't blind optimism, it was built on an off-season that completely reshaped the roster. Remember, the Oilers finished second in the division last year with 93 points, a perfectly respectable season on paper, but it ended in disappointment when they were bounced in the first round by the Anaheim Ducks. That kind of early exit, with a roster built around two of the best players on the planet in Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, doesn't just sting, it forces change. And General Manager Stan Bowman clearly heard the message loud and clear. The biggest move of the offseason was bringing in Mike Babcock as head coach, a decision that immediately signals Edmonton wants more structure, more accountability, and frankly more urgency from puck drop in October rather than waiting until the playoffs to figure things out. Babcock's track record speaks for itself, and pairing that kind of coaching pedigree with a roster that already has generational talent up front is exactly the kind of move a team makes when they're done accepting close calls. But the changes didn't stop at the coaching staff. Edmonton went out and addressed one of their biggest question marks from last season, the crease. They brought in Frederik Andersen and Devon Levi to handle the goaltending duties, giving them both a proven veteran presence and some upside in net, which is a notable upgrade if last year's tandem left anything to be desired in big moments. On the back end, they made a significant subtraction too, moving Darnell Nurse to the San Jose Sharks, a trade that reshapes their defensive core and opens the door for a different mix on the blue line. To fill that gap and add depth, they brought in Ryan Shea, Shakir Mukhamadullin, and Mathieu Joseph, giving the roster some fresh faces and new options up and down the lineup. Put all of that together, a new head coach, revamped goaltending, a reshuffled defense, and added depth pieces, and you start to see exactly why Dames is so confident. He said flat out that after watching free agency unfold and seeing how the draft played out across the league, this division is now Edmonton's to lose. Not Vegas's to win, not a coin flip between contenders, but specifically Edmonton's race to not blow. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, because Dames didn't stop at just praising the roster moves. He brought up something that's honestly haunted this franchise for over 3 decades. Edmonton has not actually won the Pacific Division, or whatever divisional alignment existed at the time, since the 1993-94 season. Let that sink in for a second. That is an extraordinarily long drought for a team that has had some of the most dominant individual talent in the history of the sport skating for them during that stretch. Dames pointed directly at one of the recurring issues behind that drought, saying the Oilers have had a habit of getting off to genuinely rough starts nearly every single year, digging themselves into early holes that they then have to claw out of just to make the playoffs, let alone chase down a division title. That pattern is real, and anyone who's followed this team closely knows exactly what he's talking about. Slow Octobers, uneven Novembers, and then a mad scramble in the second half of the season to salvage a playoff spot. It's worked often enough to get them into the postseason, but it's never been enough to actually finish on top of the division. And that's exactly why Dames frames this upcoming season differently. He believes there's a real, tangible tangible opportunity here, maybe the best one this core has had, to finally flip that script and claim the division for the first time in longer than most fans can even remember watching hockey. So what does all of this actually mean heading into puck drop this fall? It means the pressure on this Edmonton roster has never been higher, and honestly, that's exactly the point. McDavid is still in his absolute prime, still the best player on the planet by most measures, and Draisaitl continues to be one of the most lethal offensive weapons in the league. Management didn't bring in Babcock, retool the goaltending, and shuffle the defense just to sneak into the playoffs again and hope for a longer run. Every single move this offseason points toward one goal: building a roster that can go all the way and finally get this franchise back to hoisting a Stanley Cup. If Edmonton can solve that early season slump that's plagued them for years, and if the new goaltending tandem provides the kind of steady, reliable performance that was missing last spring, then Dummer's bold prediction stops looking like a hot take and starts looking like a pretty reasonable read on where this division actually stands. Vegas has real questions to answer. The rest of the Pacific hasn't exactly separated itself, and Edmonton just spent an entire offseason addressing every weakness that got exposed against Anaheim. So here's the real question heading into training camp. Does this finally become the year the Oilers stop being perennial underachievers out of the gate and start looking like the team their talent has always suggested they could be? Demers clearly believes it. The moves this summer suggest the front office believes it too. Now it's just a matter of proving it on the ice, starting in October, when we finally find out if this really is Edmonton's division to lose.